Check link. All right, so we're going to continue talking about the civil rights era, and we're going to talk about some more legislation, and in particular, the Great Society. Bear with me. I'm going to do my best here. I have been sick all weekend. All right, how we feeling today, guys? What's our stress level? Oh, nice. Those are cool, Grayson. All right, warm up. Some of the restrictions on voting, like those in the Mississippi Constitution of 1890, had the effect of disenfranchising poor white people in the South. Beginning in the 1890s, some southern states instituted grandfather clauses that allowed more poor white people to vote. Under these grandfather clauses, people were able to register to vote if their grandfather or father had voted before 1867. Why were grandfather clauses able to exclude African Americans from voting while protecting the voting rights of poor whites? All right, let's take a look. So if you answered B, you're correct. Because before Reconstruction started, African Americans were enslaved and they weren't able to vote. Hence the grandfather clause. Uh, people were able to register to vote if their grandfather had voted before 1867. Okay, let's look at a lot of us answered D. Following the withdrawal of federal troops, Republicans were elected across the South and created protections for white voters. Actually, it was Democrats that were elected. And while this did happen with D, this doesn't have, there's nothing to do with the grandfather clause. So that's why D is not the answer. Again, we have to make sure that we're reading the question and we're understanding what's being asked of us. So in this, why was the grandfather clause able to exclude African Americans from voting? That's what we need to ask ourselves. That's what we need to answer. All right. Let's look at the Great Society. The Great Society is going to be Lyndon Johnson's key piece of legislation in his presidency in the midst of the civil rights era. And it's going to create a lot of different programs that are shaped around his own upbringing. Lyndon Johnson had some hard times as a young person. His father lost their family farm when he was a teenager. And it was when this happened that this inspired President Johnson to create political goals that declared war on poverty. So he would go on to create multiple programs to transform the broken structure of American life into vibrant, prosperous democracy that he characterized as the Great Society. So as we talked about earlier, before his assassination, Kennedy created the Civil Rights Act to bring equality for all Americans. This act made it unlawful to deny somebody employment based on race, ethnicity, or gender. And after his assassination, President Johnson pushed this legislation through Congress. Johnson, who had been a supporter of civil rights for most of his life, knew his connection in Southern politics, gave him the advantage to ensure the legislation would pass. President Johnson signed the bill into law on July 2nd, 1964. Then in 1965, the Voting Rights Act would be passed. After white Southerners regained political control of the South after Reconstruction, they consistently denied African Americans their constitutional right to vote. President Johnson called for a bill to enforce the 15th Amendment, and this was the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This act made it unlawful to deny anyone the right to vote using literacy tests. And while the act did not forbid the use of poll taxes, Johnson advised his attorney general to prosecute any use of the tax. A lot of this should be reviewed for us. There have been 4 amendments to the Voting Rights Act to ensure that all Americans have the right to choose their representatives. So, how do we feel about this stuff so far? Most of us are in a good spot. All right. Let's look at Johnson's war on poverty. Okay. So Lyndon Baines Johnson is going to declare war on poverty in his Great Society legislation. And they're going to pass a number of different programs. One, the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964. This is the main focus, or the main focus of this legislation was to create jobs and easy access to higher education. The Job Corps, this free program provided job training and education to anyone between the ages of 16 to 24. College Work Study Program provided part-time work to students needing more financial assistance. And the Volunteers in Service to America provided volunteers to local nonprofits to help fight poverty in low-income areas. On July 30th, 1965, Medicare and Medicaid was established. These programs were created to help the elderly and those in poverty to obtain health care. They were amendments to the Social Security Act of 1935. With Medicaid, today, Medicaid still provides medical insurance to people who are disabled, pregnant, or from low-income families. Medicare, the Medicare insurance program, still works to cover virtually every American age 65 and older. A major component of the war on poverty was Johnson's belief in extending education to those in need. He thought that providing free or affordable educational opportunities to lower income families could improve the lives of millions who are living in poverty. So in 1965, he signed the Elementary and Secondary Education Act into law, which sought to provide grants to low-income schools that needed improved facilities. These grants also enabled the creation of special education centers. They also created Head Start because the Johnson administration felt that the success in life starts early. It sought to provide free or reduced preschool options for lower-income families. Today, Head Start provides services for over 1 million children annually. They also passed the Higher Education Act, which provides grants to colleges and universities for scholarships to deserving students from lower income families. The act expired at the end of 2013, but was extended, and currently Congress is working on a new version. So, just a quick opinion, guys. I just want to, don't take it too seriously. Just what's your opinion? There's no right or wrong answer. But do you think the government should do more or do less when it comes to poverty, healthcare, and education? Or is it just right? Where do you guys think we're at with this? All right. All right. Does anybody care to share their opinion? Why did you put why did you place your dot where you did? All right, nobody cares to share, so we'll just move on. All right. President Johnson also believed that taking care of the environment was essential to his vision of a great society. He reasoned that a tremendous amount of damage was being done in the name of technological advancement and that it was necessary to repair it. He enacted several pieces of legislation to combat environmental damage, this being the Clean Air Act of 1963, the Clean Water Act of 1965, the Land and Water Conservation Fund Act of 1965, and the Motor Vehicle Air Pollution Control Act of 1965. A number of environmental legislation. Transportation became a major initiative for the Johnson administration. President Johnson believed that having the ability to travel would aid Americans who wish to expand their occupational, educational, and cultural opportunities. Congress passed several acts to provide Americans with cheap public transportation. The Urban Mass Transportation Act of 1964 was a piece of legislation that would match local city spending in creation of inner-city rail projects. The act provided millions of Americans with low-cost transportation. The High-Speed Ground Transportation Act of 1965 sought to create high-speed rail systems to improve the speed and convenience of ground travel in the U.S. Something that's still argued about a lot today. Another way that President Johnson believed he could elevate American society was through culture. He signed several pieces of legislation that would educate the public and used various media to improve public education in the U.S. One being the National Endowment for the Arts and Humanities, which created the National Endowment for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Humanities. The NEA supports education and participation in the arts, and the NEH promotes research and public programs in the humanities. Also creating public broadcasting, believing that culture and education could reach more Americans through broadcasting. The federal government launched the Public Broadcasting System, or PBS, the National Public Radio, NPR. So what connects these two concepts? Then, right, we're in here talking about the Great Society, and hopefully it's reminded you of another massive legislation package that we talked about not that long ago, the New Deal, because they're very, very similar. But what connections can you make between Johnson's Great Society and FDR's New Deal? All right, let's see what we got. Both improve America. Both provided for civilians. Expansion of government programs. Both aid and assisted poor Americans. Both expanded government programs. Both regulated society. Good, good, good. If you had something like this, both are examples of government influencing the economy and society through legislation, which most of you did. Good job. In the 1960s, as we know, this is a time marked by national movements for equal rights, and Americans began protesting the immigration quota system. President John F. Kennedy described the immigration quota system as being nearly intolerable. Later, President Lyndon Johnson also opposed it, saying, "This system violated the basic principle of American democracy, the principle that values and rewards each man on the basis of his merit as a man. It has been un-American in the highest sense because it has been untrue in the faith that brought thousands to these shores even before we were a country." Under President Johnson in 1965, Congress passed the Hart-Celler Act, or the Immigration and Nationality Act. The act did not lift all limitations on immigration. However, it created new criteria for admitting immigrants based on uniting families, rescuing refugees from genocide, and bringing in foreign skilled labor. The act addressed many concerns and complaints about the previous policy. Mainly, it abolished the quota system by country of origin that had been established by the Immigration Act of 1924 and the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952. It used a system of providing immigration visas on a first-come, first-served basis. And these criteria included having family already in the U.S. or skills and training in certain occupations. The act still placed some numeric restrictions on the number of immigrants who could come away from any one country, and introduced a provision that an alien seeking work in America could not replace a current worker. However, it greatly expanded who was eligible for immigration to the U.S. Now, President Johnson is quoted as saying that the bill he signed was not revolutionary. Neither he nor others in his administration felt the changes being made would affect current Americans very much. Now, President Johnson, as well as Congress, clearly underestimated the number of immigrants that would come to the United States. After this was signed, immigration from non-European nations would increase significantly. We would see a large influx from Southeast Asia, mainly Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, and Thailand, as people would flee the wars that were in that region. And immigration would more than triple in the 30 years following the Hart-Celler Act compared to the 30 years before the act was passed. Diverse Asian cultures would form neighborhoods within large urban centers. A striking example of this would be the arrival of immigrants from India. Between 1870 and 1965, just a total of 16,000 Indians came to the United States. But from 1965 to 1975, nearly 97,000 Indians would come. The large wave of new immigrants prompted widespread nativism. Some Americans feared that the continued arrival of new ethnic groups would lead to a general decline of American culture. Immigration continues to be a hot button issue, as we know in the United States. Anytime we have wide scale immigration, we tend to backslide into nativism. The demographics of America have shifted significantly since the Hart-Celler Act. But America continues to be a land of immigrants, but the incoming population is no longer mainly from Europe. Today, Americans disagree about how the nation's immigration policies should be shaped for the future. All right, exit ticket. Sure, Ben, no problem. All right. No worries, Ben. All right. So for today, you've got workbook 7.5. That's going to be due Friday. You've got the rest of the class time here to work on it. I'm here if you have any questions. Just let me know.